Thanks so much, Samaya, Dr. Ahmed. It's really an honor for me to be here with you today. The work you're doing is near and dear to my heart and a lasting tribute to the pioneering work of my late husband, Archie, who dedicated his life to this kind of work. Archie was an important pioneer and beloved figure in the archival profession. He was a staunch advocate of the underrepresented, the underdocumented, and the underdogs of the world. And he carried this work, his really strong beliefs into his work as an archivist. I often thought of him as the conscience of the profession. He would be absolutely delighted that today's presenters are continuing his legacy by processing collections that document the lives and contributions of African Americans to make them, my voice, make them accessible to the world. As you probably know, and as Samaya told you, Archie was the son of prominent African-American artist Archibald John Motley Jr., who documented the African-American experience through his vibrant paintings. His mother, Edith Granzo, was a German-American of German-American descent, and his cousin Willard Motley was a novelist who was best known for Knock on Any Door, which was made into a movie. In addition to being my beloved husband, Archie is the father of our daughter, Mara Motley, who is now a physician working with underserved populations. So she's continuing in the family footsteps in yet another way. In 2002, Mara was still a minor. Archie passed away tragically, and I became the caretaker of his father's art legacy. Archie was born in Chicago, and like his father before him, loved Chicago. When he was barely 14, Archie's mother passed away suddenly, and his father brought him back to live in the Motley family home in Englewood, where he lived with his grandmother. After starting at De La Salle, Archie transferred to Englewood High, where he graduated. He earned a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Depaul while working part-time at the Chicago Historical Society, which became the Chicago History Museum. His master's degree, also in philosophy, was from Loyola University, Chicago, where he was accepted into the PhD program, but never really pursued it. Archie spent his entire career at the Chicago Historical Society, going from part-time student worker to full-time curator of archives and manuscripts, and later archivist emeritus. At CHS, he built a premier archival collection. He broke new ground by assiduously collecting African Americans and other underdocumented communities that make up Chicago and the world. His greatest joy, apart from our daughter Mara, was connecting people with information that would help them tell a fuller story of our society. This made him a favorite of researchers who appreciated his wide-ranging knowledge of African-American history, labor history, radical history, sports history, and Chicago history. They loved his uncanny ability to connect researchers with source material they needed. This, of course, could not have happened if he had not had the foresight to collect these materials in the first place and make them available for research. As a result, Archie is thanked in more books and more effusively than probably any other archivist in the United States. After he passed, the Chicago History Museum appropriately named its online research engine Archie and dedicated its reading room in his honor. Archie was a beloved figure in the archival profession and beyond. He was a bright, engaging man of unquestionable integrity. He stood up for what he believed in and asked us to question our actions and hold ourselves to a higher standard. He was always reading to enhance his knowledge and invariably had something to add to any conversation. At professional archives meetings, Archie was the one who would ask a probing question from the back of the room to start meaningful discussion. Most commonly, you would see him, Archie, who was a great sports enthusiast, wearing a sweatshirt or t-shirt from some sports team. He was always interested in people, especially new members of the profession, and could talk with anyone. He would remember you, what interested you, and just might send you a clipping he thought you would enjoy. Archie was the first president of MAC and was made a fellow of SAA, the Society of American Archivists, for his contributions to the profession. It is the highest honor that SAA bestows. Though his institutional records are part of the Chicago History Museum, I have donated his rich collection of archival materials and books relating to African American history, sports history, and radical history to the Shorefront Legacy Center in Evanston, where we lived when he passed. It is now an integral part of BMRC, as you know. In closing, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to BMRC for naming its processing internship in honor of Archie. You honor his contributions as a man of color who pioneered in the collection of records and manuscripts that have made fuller representation and research into the richness of our cultural heritage possible. Today's presenters are carrying on his legacy in a deeply meaningful way by furthering our understanding of African American contributions to our world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valerie, for joining us and for sharing that great history and background about Archie Motley. I wanted it to be more than, just a name, and people be able to understand that we named this after, a person who contributed so much to the field. So now, without further ado, we will move on to the stars of the day. Our first presenter will be Jahiem Brown. Jahiem is as I said earlier, he's a rising sophomore at Depaul University, and he has been working this summer at Northwestern University Archives. And Jahiem, feel free to load your slides and present for us.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to my presentation about my archival internship experience with the BMRC. For those who don't know me, my name is Jahiem Brown, and I am a sophomore film and television student at Depaul University. Originally hailing from Atlanta, Georgia, an area with deep roots in African American culture and history, I became interested in this internship because it allowed me to explore the African American culture of a region unfamiliar to myself. More importantly, it allowed me to further develop my skills regarding research and deepen my ability to focus on a singular subject for an extended period of time, both of which are things I came into this internship wanting to accomplish. This summer, I was placed at Northwestern University, working under the supervision of Charlotte Wilson, curator for the Black Experience. I was tasked with creating a digital exhibition using the Katherine Flowers Papers, a collection held at the university. This collection held countless of documents pertaining to Katherine Flowers' life in the world of dance and gave me insight into the dance field for African Americans during the time period, that being the 1940s to 60s. And then here's an overview of Katherine Flowers. This is a portrait of her. Katherine Flowers was a dancer, choreographer, physical education teacher, and anthropologist. Born in Sherman, Texas, Flowers' dance career started when she was just a child in her backyard performing for the residents of the community. Dance would continue to have a positive effect on Flowers as she grew into a young lady. She was a part of the dance club at her high school and also assisted in teaching youth classes during the summer. Flowers went on to college studying physical education, voice, and dramatics. It is here where she began to see the world of dance through a much more serious lens. Throughout her college years, she would get trained in different styles of dance while also continuing to be a dance teacher for the youth. After graduating from what is now Emporia State University, Flowers taught physical education in the Chicago public school system and retired after 25 years of service. After her teaching career, Flowers opened her own dance school and would eventually recruit dancers from her school to join her group, the Katherine Flowers Dancers. This group would go on to perform many numbers in different events around the city of Chicago. Eventually, Flowers developed her own dance production called Beulah de Bach, which was then put on by her company and narrated by her. The production would go on a national tour to countless colleges in the summer of 1950 and continue to gain critical acclaim and have one-off performances for years following its creation. Coming into this internship, I had just a few expectations for my role and what I wanted to accomplish. As it pertains to the Katherine Flowers Papers, I came in thinking the collection would basically be her life story, a series of events and familial connections and accomplishments that can be used to develop a coherent biographical exhibition. In a way, the collection did offer a story, but it wasn't as easy to put together as I expected. This being my first time working with archives, I wasn't aware of the true size some collections have compared to others. The Flowers collection was 6 boxes, and that was considered a small collection. Now that I have the experience looking through a collection and attempting to develop a story, I see how a large collection may provide more context for such tasks. As it pertains to the exhibit development, I had grand plans when it came to the website layout and audiovisual components that either weren't possible with the software used to build the website, or I just wasn't able to find the materials necessary to do what I envisioned. My mother would say my eyes were larger than my stomach. In other words, I tried to bite off more than I could chew. I had to scale my ideas back a bit and work with what the collection gave me. Regarding the role of an archivist, I came into this internship with the smallest inkling of what an archivist actually does. I've always thought of archives as a vast collection of unreachable material stored in a location unknown. In all seriousness, though, this internship showed me that an archivist's role isn't just storing material, but it also entails processing, preserving, restoring, and showcasing. The archivist's role is driven by the prospect of accessibility, making it one of the most important fields in the area of research. Something I'd like to note during my experience with the Katherine Flowers Papers is that none of the information in the collection could be found online. And if they could have been, it takes a much more diligent search than what I tried to do. This realization of such a vast amount of information not being found on the internet gave me further appreciation for the archivist's role and libraries as a whole. And then now I want to get into some screenshots that I took from my digital exhibit. So this is the landing page. The picture of Catherine, this is a portrait of Catherine Flowers that I put through Canva and kind of layered side by side. And I played with the colors a little bit so it could pop when, people came to the exhibit. And the first thing you see is obviously the person that it's about. What I originally planned to do with this exhibit was to create basically a biography of her life, how she grew up as a child, how that affected her transition into the dance world, the types of dance she learned, um, videos of her teachings or the music that she had in the production and all that stuff. Like I said prior, I had a lot of vision of what I wanted the exhibit to turn into. But eventually, as I looked through the collection and I realized what I had to work with, I had to focus my attention more on a specific dance production and basically her dance career in specific areas instead of her entire life story. So this is just the landing page. Um, I went through her biography, basically how she grew up, her education. Bambula to Bop is a dance production that she created. And then I also have a legacy page that outlines some of her aspirations for the future when it came to that dance production, and also some of the dancers and choreographers she's worked alongside of. This standout quote under the introduction: there was no money for entertainment. I had to entertain myself, and in doing so, I stepped into the theater. Catherine was kind of shoved into dance at an early age because of the passing of her father. When she was young, her dad owned a barber shop and their family was pretty much well off. She used to attend screenings of dance performances and theater shows, and she would come home and kind of replicate those shows. Um, so once her father passed away, the money to go to those theater shows and dance productions was no longer there, and life was a lot less frugal for her. So she made the dances from recollection and would take kids from her neighborhood and put on dance productions for her neighbors and in the community. And then this is the page for Bambula to Bop. the production that Katherine Flowers developed and toured in the summer of 1950. I added a definition of bambula, which is basically a drum from Western Africa. This whole page was basically a dedication to the production. Once the exhibition becomes live, you're going to see a description of the music that was used in the production, the artists that developed the music and the score, um, the different colleges that Bambula de Bop had toured. There's photographs of some of the dancers. And then at the end of the exhibit, there's from the collection section where there's just like, I think 12 pictures of the dancers, Flowers youth dance classes, and some other advertisement photography. And then this is another piece of that same Bambula de Bop page that I added into the exhibit, kind of explaining some of the dances that are pictured below. And that is all. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Jahiem. We will save questions until the end. We will now move on to our next presenter for today. So Tukesha Hill. Tukesha, as I said, is just graduated from IIT, Illinois Tech, and will be presenting to us about the work she's done this summer at the Chicago History Museum. Take it away, Tukesha.
Hello, my name is Tukesha. I am a graduate of IIT from the School of Architecture, and my presentation will be focused more on the files from the Zebina Eastman archives. So my presentation is called Echoes of Freedom, focusing on the voices of liberation. So most of these documents are coming from Zebina Eastman's collection over time. So like we're just looking at this and like what he collected from like Northern abolitionists and politicians, as well as formerly enslaved people, as well as free Black people. And so a little bit more about Zebina Eastman in his early life. He was born in 1815 in Vermont. This is a state that was more so known for their early opposition of slavery, as well as like their debate over slavery as it intensified over the United States. So Eastman was heavily like influenced by justice, equality, and just like the written word, which influenced like his ability to get the message across to abolish slavery itself. His early activism and anti-slavery journalism, he was part of the anti-slavery movement, and he mostly used newspapers and speeches to fight against slavery and injustice. And he moved to Chicago, which was more to get more heavily into the anti-slavery movement and into abolitionist organizing. He was more so known for the Genius of Liberty in the Western Citizen. He also had another publication called the Free Press, but he was more so known for the Genius of Liberty and the Western Citizen, which are the two most important abolitionist publications in the Midwest. He is an organizer, advocate, and ally. He worked for both Black and white abolitionist ministers and organizers when it came to the anti-slavery movement. And he used journalism to basically demand an end of slavery, defend the rights of free Black people, and to expose racist laws and violence. And his legacy was more so just like helping make Chicago a more safe place for people escaping slavery. And he built the foundation for abolitionist networks and support systems. And he showed how writing and organizing could lead to a real change. And his life, it proves that like using one voice that's backed by different people can shape history. So like his writing influenced other people to join in with the movement. So this slide is titled "The Stand of Enslavement." This is the document on the left is basically like a newspaper writing about the Ohio escape, like the escape of slaves from Ohio to get to Canada to escape slavery. And this is more so to recognize that slavery did not only impact people when it ended in law. A lot of people were still escaping slavery because peonage happened right after slavery, which basically is a law that said that if you were without a job or without housing or anything of that such, or you owed money to someone, you would be re-enslaved. The effects of enslavement lived on after 1865, which was racial violence, legal exclusion, the loss of family, home, and freedom. And it was just basically like a lot of the things that happened to Black people in general was more so for the fact that the law of ending slavery did not have an immediate or complete impact that caused the immediate end of slavery in practice. Black voices in the archives. I'm more so focused on like the trauma, the resistance, and the survival that was happening when it comes to Black, the end of enslavement, because families were torn apart. The Underground Railroad was a very key component in there. The hidden churches and the secret schools, the anti-slavery schools that taught about what was happening due to slavery, and also abolitionist thought and practice. And also just enslaved Black people organizing and writing and building community in order to escape slavery. It's very key to know that these stories are not side notes. They are central to understanding African American freedom. This is more so in the archives. So in the archives, there are letters describing the Underground Railroad journeys. There's notes about anti-slavery prayer meetings and church resistance. There's requests from newly freed families asking for housing, jobs, and to reunite with their young ones. And this is basically history told in the words of those who lived or witnessed it. That's what's in the archives themselves. The prophecies of abolitionists. So one of the documents that I found was the conditional abolishment of slavery. So Julian Harvey wrote to Zebina Eastman about the conditional end of slavery. And in the document, it confirms the ratification of the 13th Amendment. It highlights how abolitionist networks shared critical national updates, and it marks a pivotal moment in the US history, but also making us aware that slavery was conditional and it did not fully end. Abolitionist service. So Bride, who was another abolitionist within the anti-slavery movement, he's basically talking about his commitment to ending slavery and his plans to attend the anti-slavery reunion, which happened after the end of slavery after 1865. Bride was a Underground Railroad conductor, and he aided over 600 African-American peoples escaping enslavement. And he also witnessed firsthand in his younger age, between 1818 and 1821, how the brutality of slavery and what it looked like in person. He also worked alongside John Brown, both mostly the father, John Brown Sr., when it comes to the formation of the Liberty Party. And he wanted to basically see he wanted to see like the reunion for the anti-slavery movement to be honored, to actually honor the legacy of the anti-slavery movement and not just talk about it and just have a fun time. He wanted it to like actually think over like what happened, why it happened, and how can we continue to improve. And then documented abolitionist history. Another abolitionist, his name is William Goldell. This is more so a document talking about like how he wanted to be careful with documenting abolitionist history, as there's usually a lot of repetition, a lot of issues with miscommunication and misrepresentation in the creation of documenting history, and making sure that we and they are offering the ability to submit existing work that continues in writing in parts, or more so like highlighting the political, social, and legal complexities of the movement itself. The Holly School. So the Holly School is an anti-slavery school that was created by the Holly family. And it was more so schools that were created before slavery ended up until the Reconstruction era. Sorry. So basically the Holly School in this document itself, there was a mob that attacked the Holly School, and basically destroyed the school's library and the educational materials for Black and Brown children who were learning about the anti-slavery movement. And so therefore, a lot of the information that was preserved there is no longer accessible because they could not find it. But a lot of this highlights the continuing struggle for racial equality and just beyond emancipation itself, and also just like after the end of slavery. Correcting abolitionist history. This more so double downs on like how they wanted the reunion to like they wanted the reunion to basically be a time to address misrepresentation that happens at abolitionist parties or events. And they also doing this in this article confirmed that Cleveland was the first national abolition convention, and also the election of the president for the convention itself, Bernie, for his nomination. But also how a few of the abolitionists that are there also had some opposition when it comes to how political the abolitionist party was and the organization was itself. And also just preserving abolitionist legacy. These, after this, is like pretty much documents of people who were enslaved or were escaping. So these are stories directly from African-American people. So James Kirby, I'm reading, he was him and another Black man had escaped from America to the UK, to England, to Bristol specifically, over that area. And while he was getting off the ship, the captain that was there had basically called him the slur for Black people. He sought help from the U.S. consulate, which is where Eastman was in 1869. And this basically like tells us that even if not in the U.S., Black people face racism and abandonment, even outside of the country itself. And it also just reveals the global dimensions of anti-Blackness and the resilience that African Americans seek outside of the United States to be a full person. Reverend Gabriel Bennett, he was formerly enslaved and freed during the Civil War. He became a preacher, a temperance leader, and a political speaker. He served at Camp Nelson in Kentucky after the war. And he was also part of the 1874 anti-slavery reunion. And he is a respected Black leader in Kentucky. Why does this matter? So a lot of times people say how African Americans, a core component of resistance and revolution, has been within the church. And it just shows back that even during enslavement time, Black people were still core components of the church who used the church to bring forward activism and public service and freedom for Black people. Elu Grayson. So with Elu Grayson, she had escaped, and her enslaver, Stephen Knuckles, had tried to re-enslave her, and she ended up getting locked in the city armory. And she knew that she would face further re-enslavement. And so what happened was that Zebina Eastman and a few other abolitionists had actually issued a fake charge to legally remove her from the city armory. And the deputy chef at the time, George Anderson, had lost her while they were transporting her. And she ended up escaping to freedom in Canada. This is also the first case where Eastman and a few other abolitionists were indicted by Chicago. And it's the only case in Chicago where someone was indicted for rescuing an enslaved person, but this case was dropped after the Civil War had begun. So they never fully went through with being jailed. Gimme Pendon, she was kidnapped from Africa as a child and enslaved in the US. She was freed later in life, but her grandchildren were re-enslaved. And she worked with different allies and different abolitionists to sue for their freedom. And they raised funds and everything to bring them to Canada. Her story shows the ongoing fight for Black family freedom even after emancipation. And then Caroline, she is a 15-year-old enslaved girl who escaped from St. Louis and fled to Milwaukee. Her family was originally from Louisiana, and she got sold to St. Louis. And then from St. Louis, she fled to Milwaukee. With the help of abolitionists and local families, she had hid from slave catchers, and she was smuggled along Canada in a secret journey, which was most likely the Underground Railroad, through Chicago and Detroit. And after her freedom, when she got across the got from Detroit over to Canada. She later wrote letters saying that how she got married and she owned property and she became a mother and a grandmother. It just shows the courage of Black women, but also many Black people who resisted slavery and the community who risked everything to basically help them get freedom. And then the importance of language. So when it comes to documenting papers and historical documents for researchers that have access to it, it's very important that we bridge the language barriers when it comes to not only giving access to other researchers, but also to the communities, to African American communities, or just communities in general who do not speak with academic language. So my suggestion was basically to use specific and simple and specific explanatory language. So, for example, on the left, it says emancipation was contested through policy. And then on the right, which is my version, is freedom is not achievable if the 13th Amendment still allows the enslavement of African American people. It's the idea that we have a complete thought and a complete explanation of what is going on, but not making it where it's too much information being pushed onto someone, but it can be understood like, oh, this is a full thought, this is exactly what happened without missing any of the parts of history, where it can be just like changed or altered in a way that is demeaning of someone's character, acknowledging people as full humans and full people. The reason behind bridging this gap is that we wanted to basically make historical language more accessible to different audiences and also clarify the realities of oppression and resistance that happen to African American people, or to people in general when it comes to documenting historical documents, and then also censor the truth over neutrality, and just like having different communities engage with historical narratives that they didn't have the opportunity to navigate before because they didn't have the language to assess it. Moving forward, connecting the archives to action. 3 points is just to read and share these stories, whether it's letters, records, or histories. Reclaiming the archives for the communities. A lot of times, which I talk with the Chicago History Museum, is that a lot of documents, though they might end up being digitized or not digitized, is very important that like things such as indigenous papers or items that are personal are returned back to communities who ask for them to be returned back to. But still making them community center or have community access to them, right? So once we document them and make them digital, it is very important that if that community requests for them to be back, to keep them under preservation, and within that community that we do our due diligence to give that back to the community. And also just the third option, using history to fuel action. Just letting the stories of resistance, survival, and justice inform your activism, education, organizing, and political policy efforts today. A lot of times people are uninformed about what has happened in the past, and so therefore a lot of things that have happened in the past tend to happen again in the present. And so if we are educated on what has happened before, we won't make the same things that happen again. And these are just some museums or organizations to look at if you want to further your research and even to discuss what that comes to the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Tukesha. That was excellent. Thank you so much. And we're just so honored to have both you and Jahiem here today. Yeah, so we would love to open the floor up to the audience. If you have questions for either Jahiem or Tukesha about the research they presented or their experience. Well, while everyone's taking a moment to think about it, I will just ask a question and kind of, I would love to know what's the main takeaway from this summer, from your experience doing this work, doing this archival processing and producing this, and what's the main takeaway for you?
I can go first. The main takeaway for me from this summer was that a lot of us are uninformed because we tend not to read or not have access to things that are very much accessible. But sometimes accessibility looks different for certain people. And So we all have to do our part to make sure that we all help each other. The thought of intercommunalism, and not only when it comes to community and community help, but also when it comes to education and access to history itself, because that's also, it's accessible, but it's not accessible at the same time.
I kind of want to like piggyback off that accessibility note. I would say, especially for me when it came, because my like project was digital, I feel like um what I took away was accessibility and convenience and how they kind of go hand in hand. Prior to this experience, like archival material never seemed accessible to me. It seemed like you would have to do a lot of work to try to figure out, okay, what library or museum has what you're looking for. And even if you do find that collection, is it going to have exactly what you're trying to find? And I feel like where I was placed specifically kind of catered towards the convenience aspect of archival research, where it came to, okay, some pieces of this collection are digitized. The pieces that aren't digitized, they're going to be basically processing to add to an exhibit and make it more accessible for people who probably don't have the ability to come to the library and reserve the collection for their own perusing, like in person. Or if they're interested in something specific, like maybe the dance production or where it toured, they could just go to the exhibit online, and it's just like an easier access feature. And I feel like if it's marketed that like archives aren't so hard to reach, or that it's like a little bit more accessible than people may seem, then it would be more widely used.
Thank you. We need you to be part of that marketing campaign then, Han. You can help us market archives as easier to use. Then we'll come back to you about that. Anyone else have any questions for Tukesha and Jahiem? Yes, Rebecca? Yes.
Hi, thank you both so much for your presentations. It's really exciting to see your work and the energy that you're bringing to it and the vision you also have. I'm really excited, especially about Tukesha's work, because I think that we don't hear enough about Black abolitionists nationally, and particularly in Illinois. I think I've only ever heard of Elijah Lovejoy. So thank you for filling in that historical record. You had mentioned a particular person who was really captured my imagination, and I wondered if you could tell me more about this person, if you know anything about Jemmy Pinden. I was wondering kind of like if the part of the archive that you found was sort of like what we call a slave narrative, or was it like, do we get to hear her voice in what you found?
For Jimmy Pendant, it wasn't really a recollection directly from her. It was more so a retelling from a white abolitionist about him helping her escape to freedom, but also just like kind of just giving a recap of her life story that he had discussed with her before. I think that he ended up going no contact with her like after she kind of got freedom. So he never really like got to like get like this is her words, this is coming out of her mouth kind of thing. It was more so just like a recollection of his experience with meeting her and learning her life story and how she got to freedom.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat from Kimberly Black, of Chicago State University, one of our BMRC board members. The question said, what surprised you most about your introductory experience working in archives? What skills or knowledge did you learn that you will use in future endeavors?
I would say for me, the most surprising aspect was like, again, the fact that a lot of these collections, like the information within the collections, isn't found on the internet. Like there's like even my collection was just 6 boxes, and like the only thing you could find about Katherine Flowers was her name and the digitized collection that Northwestern already had. So if I'm kind of correlating that to much larger collections of maybe 30, 80, 100 or so boxes, there's probably portion of that information that's actually accessible through like online research, and then just a vast majority of like back end stuff that we'll never see. Like even in my collection, there were contracts between Katherine and the schools that she performed at. There were like letters between her and some like organizations. She was trying to obtain like a fellowship to write a book. There's like a whole bunch of stuff that probably won't see the internet. And I'm sure that correlates again, like with a larger proportion when it comes to larger collections. Um, Skills, I think something that I really developed is just like organizing and structure. Being a film major and then having to develop a digital exhibit, which is basically a story, kind of went hand in hand. And I feel like this experience has helped me when it comes to maybe wanting to make a biopic in the future about another historical figure, or maybe a documentary when it comes to like taking pieces of historical information and trying to fit them into a coherent story.
Thank you, Jahiem. Tukesha, would you like to answer that question?
Yes. So what surprised me most from working in the archives, I think it was like probably 2 weeks into when I started. I think it was like a pleasant surprise rather than a surprise in general. So I'm used to like reading like historical documents from like the South when it comes to enslavement, and I'm like used to constantly seeing like the slurs. And it wasn't that I expected it of the North or anything like that, but like it was just like a pleasant surprise that like a lot of the abolitionists, a lot of the politicians, when they referred to Black people, they never actually used like the N-word slur to refer to African American people. They of course use colored and they use Negro and things like that, but like at the time period and context of the time period itself, that was way more progressive than the terms that was actually used when they referred to African American people. So that was one of the things that surprised me just a little bit. And then like the skills and knowledge that I learned that I'll use in my future endeavors. I think Angela can attest to this, but a lot of the things that I did while at the Chicago History Museum was things that I've already done before. Because I've been like looking at archives since I was in middle school because I was a very curious child that had access to the internet. Um, and so a lot of like the transcribing work, a lot of the reading cursive and faded words was like a very interesting thing to me. And I always like looking at it. So, like that was a very much like, oh, this is like me and doing like what I enjoy kind of thing. But I think one thing that we can definitely touch on, because we ended up having this like issue when we were documenting like the one time that the N-word slur was used, is like figuring out like, oh, what do institutions use when it comes to documenting slurs itself, when it comes to not only like the writing as is, but also the guidelines when it comes to summaries or metadata and things like that. Like, how can we be accountable when we are documenting history for people to learn about?
Thank you so much. And I do want to acknowledge that Angela Hoover from the Chicago History Museum and Charlotte Wilson from Northwestern, who were the advisors to our two interns this summer, are both in the audience, and we thank them both for the work that they've done to help Tukesha and Jahiem get to the places that they got to in their projects. Are there any last questions before we wrap up?
Can I just ask a question? It's probably not. This is Kali from University of Illinois, Chicago. I was able to meet with Jahiem, and he kind of hit upon this question, so maybe um, he could give a brief response and fleshing that out a little bit about how this experience helped him develop as sort of a storyteller. So I wonder if the experience for both of you, during the experience of working with the collections, were you able to get a chance to reflect on yourselves as historical actors and or slash collectors? How important the materials that you may be generating in the future may be, something that we would collect and researchers would use into the future.
To clarify, are you like asking like how do we see like our future endeavors being researched in the same way?
No, like reflecting on yourself as like a Katherine Flowers
Hmm.
or right, exactly, as a historical actor, because we often work with materials as, you know, special collections librarians and archivists. We often work with materials, we work with researchers that use the materials. Were you able to actually think of yourselves as historical figures, historical actors in that particular way?
I don't know if I saw myself to that extent, but now that you bring it up, I kind of see where the work was like kind of influential in the process of bringing that information across to another person.
I would say yes. I've always had like an interest in history and documenting history as well as preserving it. And I oftentimes am like I worry, not worried, but like I am very sensitive to how stories are being told, um, and accessibility. And I believe like my role in like documenting the history of the Zebina Eastman files was to be that accessibility point, not only in terms of like digitalization, but also in terms of like language barriers, academic language barriers, as well as like even making things in more simpler terms. Um, but like I think this is like added a more rich component to like to that factor of myself of like how can I even enhance my skills and my ability to add to the preservation and historic preservation community and also add to how people view and also how people have access to history itself.
Thank you both. Congratulations.
Yes,
You
thank
made
you
it
both.
through.
Thank you both so much, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate your support for the BMRC. We want to remind you that it's through donations that help us to offer these kind of paid internships to these students, and we would appreciate your support. And thank you again, and congratulations to Tukesha and Jahiem, and we hope to see you again in the future as we are able to give showcase to other people who are benefiting from these kind of programs. Thank you all for joining us today.